On the night of September 26th, 1983, every light you can see in this image almost went out. Not from a war that had been building for years, not from a political decision made in a boardroom, from a decision made by one man in a bunker in the middle of the night in about 10 minutes. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and almost nobody knows it. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the world it happened in. In 1983, the Cold War was running hotter than it had been in years. President Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Soviet leadership was convinced, genuinely convinced, that the United States was preparing a surprise nuclear first strike. Both sides had thousands of nuclear warheads pointed at each other, on hair trigger alert, ready to fire within minutes of an order. Then 3 weeks before the night in question, the Soviet military shot down a South Korean passenger plane. They believed it was a spy plane. It was not. 269 people were killed. The international reaction was furious. Reagan condemned it as a massacre by Soviet aggressors. In Moscow, the military went to an even higher state of alert. The world was tense in a way it had rarely been before. Into this world, on the night of September 26th, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov arrived for a 12-hour shift at a secret facility called Serpukhov 15, about 60 kilometers south of Moscow. The facility housed the command center for the Oko Early Warning Satellite System, a network of Soviet satellites watching American missile fields 24 hours a day. If the Americans launched, the satellites would detect the heat signature of missile engines within seconds. Soviet leadership would have minutes to decide whether to fire back. Petrov had worked with this system for years. He understood it better than almost anyone. He was not even supposed to be there that night. He was filling in for a colleague who had called in sick. The first few hours of the shift passed quietly. Then, shortly after midnight, a siren screamed through the bunker. Across the room, a panel flashed to life in angry red letters. Launch, high reliability. One American missile, incoming. Every face in the room turned toward Petrov. Protocol was clear. If the system reported a launch, he was to report it immediately up the chain of command. His report would go to his superiors. Their report would go higher. And somewhere at the top of that chain, someone would decide whether to fire back. A Soviet counterstrike against the United States would almost certainly trigger an American counterstrike against the Soviet Union. Estimates suggested roughly 100 million people killed on the first day alone, within months, possibly a billion. Petrov stared at the screen, and he did not pick up the phone. Something wasn't right. He had been trained repeatedly that an American first strike would be massive, overwhelming, hundreds of missiles simultaneously to destroy Soviet launch capability before it could respond. One missile? Made no sense. Why would you start a nuclear war with one missile? He checked the ground radar. The radar that should have been picking up missiles rising above the horizon showed nothing. He knew this satellite system. He had helped develop parts of it. He knew it was new. He knew it was not yet fully trusted. He knew it could fail. Then the system escalated. A second alert, a third, a fourth, a fifth. 5 missiles now. The system's confidence level rising. The room around him getting louder. He had maybe 10 minutes before the decision became irrelevant. The computer was certain, the screen was certain, the protocol was certain. Petrov was not certain. He picked up the phone. He told his superiors it was a malfunction, a false alarm. Stand down. There was a pause on the other end of the line that probably felt like a very long time. The bunker waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No confirmation from ground radar, no impacts, no explosions on the horizon. The alert faded. The screen went quiet. No missiles had been launched. The system had malfunctioned. A Soviet satellite called Cosmos 1382 had picked up the reflection of sunlight on high-altitude clouds and mistaken it for the heat signature of missile engines. A rare alignment of sun and cloud. A flaw in a sensor filter. A software error that nearly triggered the end of the world. Petrov sat at his console after it was over, trying to understand what had just happened, what had almost happened. At first he was praised. His commanding general noted that his actions were correct. Then the politics set in. The incident had exposed serious flaws in the Soviet early warning system and in the satellite technology that powerful scientists and officials had championed. If Petrov were officially rewarded, those scientists would have to be officially held accountable for building a system that almost started a nuclear war. Instead, he was reprimanded for failing to properly fill in his military diary during the incident. He was reassigned to a less sensitive post, took early retirement, and was forbidden from discussing what had happened. The world knew nothing. For more than a decade, the incident stayed buried in classified files. Then the Cold War ended. Soviet archives began to open, and former officials started speaking about events that had previously been unspeakable. Petrov had retired to a modest life in a small Russian town, growing vegetables, living quietly. His wife, who had been married to him for years, knew nothing about what had happened that night. When she finally asked, he said he had simply been doing his job. When the story finally became public in the late 1990s, it caused a sensation. Petrov, the quiet retired officer growing vegetables in a small Russian town, suddenly found himself called the man who saved the world. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said at a ceremony in his honor, "It is hard to imagine anything more devastating for humanity than all-out nuclear war between Russia and the United States. Yet this might have occurred by accident on September 26, 1983, were it not for the wise decisions of Stanislav Petrov." In 2013, he received the Dresden Peace Prize. In 2018, posthumously, the Future of Life Award, carrying $50,000. In interview after interview, Petrov refused to describe himself as a hero. "I was simply doing my job," he said. "I was the right person at the right time. That's all." He died in May 2017, quietly, in the same modest way he had lived. The announcement of his death was briefly noted in international news. Then the world moved on. The world that is still here because one man, filling in for a sick colleague on a random Tuesday night in September, looked at a screen that said launch and trusted his own judgment over the machine. He was not a president, not a general, not a hero in any story anyone had written yet. He was a software engineer who understood the system he was monitoring well enough to know when it was wrong. And he was right. And we are here.